Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, disaster planning, crisis management, COVID, anything that can help you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Longtime listeners, you'll know that I was presenting at the recent Business Continuity Institute Hybrid World, I think I got the title right, in London, beginning of November 2022. And I was lucky enough to attend a few sessions as well. And I thought it would be nice if I could get a couple of these speakers to come on the show. And today, I'm lucky enough to have one of those speakers and a session that I really enjoyed and thought everyone here might be interested in as well. So I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Liz Royle as we talk about the topic, building emotional resilience and creating effective human recovery processes for situations. Dr. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. I really enjoyed your session. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
It was well attended too. It looked like a full house.
Yes, people seemed really engaged. It felt different this year. I've talked about the subject on many occasions, but I got a sense this time that people are finally getting it and finally thinking, "Oh, that's relevant to us," and that was really nice to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a comment about that, but I want to
Okay.
get people familiar with who Dr. Liz Royle is. Can you take a minute or two to talk about yourself, what you do, and how you got into this crazy industry of ours?
Yeah. It's certainly working with trauma and crisis mental health is definitely a challenging place to be. It's not where I set out to be. I basically set out my helping career working in crisis settings in advice agencies, the courts, and I just got a bit hooked on that sense of actually you can make a really big difference to somebody's life by doing the right thing at the right time. And I ended up doing some mental health qualifications. So I'm a qualified mental health practitioner, a psychotherapist. And then I got a job working with a big police service over in the United Kingdom, and I was just thrown in at the deep end. And I had to respond to all kinds of crises and trauma within police officers and staff. I started out then as a continual student, did my master's, my PhD, did loads of hands-on experience. And I think it's safe to say I've dealt with pretty much every kind of incident that you could ever hope not to be involved in. And so I've actually been in the field now for over 25 years. And I work now primarily with organisations. I work with our National Health Service in the UK, the Council of the European Union, local governments, and big corporations, big retailers. So right across the board. And I'm passionate about trauma. So I do lots of writing. I've written several books, lots of presenting, because I just feel as though education is so key in people managing this correctly. And there are so many myths and misconceptions. I'm on a bit of a passion to change that. So yes, that's me in a nutshell, really.
Well, I said I had a comment, and one thing that I've noticed is for years and years, excuse me, organizations, communities, we were talking about, plans and processes and wanting to get certification, especially in business continuity and meeting regulations and things like that. Like it was very plan and program focused. And I think your session, what I noticed, because it was a full house, is that people are now starting to realize that it's not just the plan, it's the people behind the plan too. And I think that even though organizations say, people are our greatest asset and all this and that, and they still don't bring people to the forefront. It's always the plan and all this other stuff. And I noticed when during your talk, it's people were starting to realize that all those plans and processes, they mean nothing without the people behind them.
Absolutely. And I've worked with a lot of organizations in building up a strategy, and people, they might get me to come in and say, actually, can you advise us on how we might deal with big incidents, or our staff are exposed to trauma on a fairly regular basis, what do we do? And this, one of the things that they don't actually start with at the beginning is why are we doing this? They think, oh, it's a tick in the box. We need to do something. We need to get a process. We need to box it off. So the first step is always looking at, okay, what is it you're trying to achieve? What are you trying to fix? What is the problem you've got? And just step it back a little bit. But the other really common things that I see is that they don't engage the people who are going to be actually part of that plan.
Yeah.
And that might sound as though it's quite a simple thing to do, get everybody to have a bit of buy-in, but what they don't realize is the very subject of mental health, particularly trauma and crisis, the sharp end of mental health. Human beings don't want to talk about it. They have an inherent, So we do. I've over the years, I've done loads of training with audiences who are quite hostile to the concept. I think in particular groups of quite macho cultures. Police firearms officers are one of the most demanding audiences to actually get the message across. But if you start looking at why that is, then you can start to dismantle some of those beliefs and some of the defenses and actually get them to think, oh, yes, I do need to do this, and I can see why. And organizations that don't do that actually are just, again, the phrase is lip service. They're just they're saying, they're talking, they're just talking the talk, but they're not actually doing anything. So understanding that people don't want to talk about it because they don't think it's relevant to them. They think, oh, it's if you've got an issue, then you shouldn't be in this job. Or they are frightened. And
I was just going to ask that. Is it fear?
Yeah.
Does fear come in there somewhere?
Yeah. And it can be fear of opening a can of worms and not knowing what to do with it. So let's just leave it to the professionals. We don't want anything to do with any of that. But it can also be fear of their own stuff. So if you've got people who are carrying, unresolved issues, unresolved trauma themselves, and you're suddenly asking them to start thinking about the staff, that is really fearful for them because they think, I can't empathise with my staff because the lid will come off on my own stuff. And there's those levels of fear, but there's also the stereotypes around what mental health is, what mental health professionals are. People fear that we're just wrapping people up in cotton wool, that, we're making them soft. And they should just toughen up. So unless we can deal with all of these attitudes, we're not going to engage people. And that's always got to be part of your strategy, is looking at, okay, how do we do this? It's those kind of nuances are so important. It's not just a case of, right, let's get a process, let's do some training, we know what we're supposed to do, and and that's that, box ticked.
Yeah, I'm kind of experiencing a little bit of that at the moment. I'm asking some questions, and some people that I'm working with are, oh, well, we'll deal with that later. But I know I've been doing this 26 years. I know if I talk about it later, we're going to have issues right up until then, and we're going to have these conversations again. So really, all you're doing is snow plowing and pushing it down the road. I've worked with some leadership too who also don't want to talk about mental health or the impacts of disasters because they say, oh, and I've actually sat with the CIO many years ago who said, I know what's going to happen and how we're going to deal with things, but I don't want the staff to get upset. So we don't want to talk to them about this kind of stuff. You
Mm.
know, does that relate back to the fear, or is it just simply, I'd rather not deal with any of this stuff. Just give me the plan.
Yeah, it's natural avoidance, and again, if you look at why people do it, avoiding something that's not pleasant is actually, it's not only a natural human response, but it's actually part of our survival response. So it's really deeply embedded in our psyche, not to deal with anything that makes us feel uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So what we have to do, our role then, is to try and make it comfortable. And it's comparable with making a will, isn't it? Nobody wants to make a will and think
Yeah.
about, okay, yes, what's going to happen when I die? And yet everybody's going to die. And so it has to be framed in a way that it feels like a positive thing. It feels empowering. It feels like taking control. And I think because people don't tend to feel in control of the whole issue of mental health because they don't understand it, then that fuels that avoidance. We'll deal with it when it happens. Or the classic one for this is, well, we've got an employee assistance program, so they'll deal with it. So we don't need to think about it.
Like
And
give it to
yet,
somebody else.
yes, I'll abdicate responsibility, basically,
Hmm.
which is one of the big pitfalls that organizations actually fall into.
So
Yeah.
how do you go about changing that conversation or that viewpoint then? If you do run into leadership, like
Mm.
the one I mentioned, or I think you said it was the firefighters service that are, I
Yeah,
think the word you use is demanding sometimes, with
yeah.
information, and when I'm knocking firefighters, just so nobody's
No, no,
taking
and
notes, we're not
it
saying
was
that.
it was police firearms officers over
Ah, that's
here
what it
in the
was. Okay.
UK. So, and they're not all armed, but the ones who are armed over here are quite
Yeah.
roughy tufty. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm not denigrating them all. They're a lovely group of people, but they're a tough crowd.
So then how do you get them to come around to see different? How do we phrase that conversation?
It's actually it's quite simple. We just educate them. We just educate them in a really clear, simple way of actually mental health is not this, particular crisis and trauma. It's not this vague, ambiguous, woolly thing. It's very cut and dried. It's very simple. We look at how people respond in a traumatic event, and we can predict lots of behaviour. We can predict the kind of things that will help, and when we can educate them like that, and it makes sense to them, and they can relate it to themselves and their loved ones, then they buy in. They get it. It's getting in front of people to actually give them that information, which is, as I say, this is why I'm passionate about just talking. I love talk trauma all day, because people, when they get it and you take the fear away and you break down the stereotypes around it, it is actually quite simple.
I, I'm just curious. Is it really taking the fear away, or is it getting them to actually see what their fear is?
It
Is there
can
a
be
difference?
both. It can be both, depending on what the fear relates to. If the fear is of the unknown, then let's make it known in simple ways. Let's not wrap it all up into, sort of big words and neuroscience. Let's keep it nice and simple because that's possible. If it's fear about, their own avoidance, again, that's about making them feel as though it's, for me, it's about saying, actually, I know what I'm doing. I'm a safe pair of hands, and giving them that confidence that actually nothing bad's going to happen. Because there's a fear, there's fear of people like me. People think that I'm going to make them cry. I'm going to reveal their hidden thoughts. I'm going to uh, section them, which is sort of make them have to go into a contained hospital or I'm going to give them medication, I'm going to drug them. And again, these are so ingrained in people through the media, stereotypes, dramas, television.
Hmm.
But actually, sometimes they just need to know that the people who are going to help the organization, whether that's me, whether it's somebody else, are just normal people. They're pragmatic, they're practical, and they're not frightening.
I
And
guess as you were mentioning that, it's kind of just treat everyone or talk to everyone on the same level.
yes,
Forget
yeah,
about the CIO and the president.
yeah,
Those titles mean nothing
no,
because you take all that away and it's just
mm,
window dressing. You're still the person who feels
mm,
exactly the same way if you're a president of the organization as someone who just walked in the door who's going to
mm,
be dusting shelves.
yes,
You have the exact same feelings.
yes, yeah, you're a human being.
Yeah.
And I know some of them that might feel like a little bit of a stretch, but they are. They're all, they're all human beings, and everybody has got anxieties and fears and hopes and dreams, and misunderstandings and stereotypes. And it's just about saying, actually, we're all human, so we will look at how do we then communicate with this human being who is here in front of me. How do we get that message across?
Well, great. On that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. I told you before we started recording that I would ask questions as we go along, and we haven't even touched our agenda yet. After all of this, so
I
thank you
did
very
say I
much.
can talk trauma.
And apparently, I can ask lots of questions too
Yes.
about it. But this is great. End of our first segment. We are talking with Dr. Liz Royle today on building emotional resilience and creating effective human recovery processes for crisis situations. And we will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.